welcome back to the Lively Faith Podcast. I'm your host, the Reverend Nathan Stomberg, and today I'm joined by my co-host, the Reverend Mark Galloway. Mark, today we are going to be discussing an article that I recently wrote on the Transfiguration for Lively Faith magazine. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to sign up for a free copy of our magazine. It is a beautiful devotional resource that we've made for all Christians who share an affection for the common prayer tradition. Just click the link in our description to fill out the sign-up form, and we would gladly and gratefully send one to you as well. Lively Faith Magazine. So I'm going to jump right in to the article that I wrote, and as always, feel free to riff on it, ask me any questions. And after we get through reading it, I want to use it as a springboard into a conversation about spectacle and true beauty, and more specifically, why younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, are increasingly drawn to the beauty of the ancient liturgy. So the title of this article is Transfiguration, No Mere Spectacle. We begin with a quote from St. Augustine's Sermon on the New Testament, Sermon 28. Jesus himself indeed shone as the sun, signifying that he is the true light that enlightens every man come into the world. What the sun is to the eyes of the flesh, so he is to the eyes of the heart. Like so many episodes in the life of our Lord, his transfiguration at Mount Sinai receives disproportionately little attention in the Church's worship compared to its paramount importance in the economy of salvation, if for no other reason than for the finite number of Sundays in a single year. In the Revised Common Lectionary tradition, the Transfiguration of Christ is typically commemorated in the Gospel reading for the last Sunday after the Epiphany, sitting as an exclamation point at the end of the season and as a guidepost as we follow him down the mountain into the desert for Lent. The only other day dedicated to this moment is the Feast of Transfiguration, which falls every year on August 6th, and not always on a Sunday. We owe it to ourselves then, out of obedience to our Lord and for our own spiritual well-being, to linger in the radiant glow of the transfigured Christ with the apostles Peter, James, and John more often. The Transfiguration is no mere spectacle. It is the inescapable dawn of the Son's manifest power and glory. It is a proclamation of divine authority which demands our response. To borrow from St. Augustine, Jesus shone as the sun on the mount of his transfiguration. The manifestation of the glory of Jesus takes the form of brilliant light. As we read from St. Luke's account in this year's lectionary cycle, and we happen to be entering year C, about 8 days after Peter had acknowledged Jesus as the Christ of God, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. The dazzling white described by Luke, taken literally, means as bright as a flash of lightning. Now, Jesus was not reflecting light from an external source, however. He was illuminated from within. I'm also reminded here of the Nicene Creed, where we pray, we believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father.
Yeah, it's literally pure energy.
The purest.
That's what he becomes.
Pure light, pure energy.
Yeah, it's exactly what's going to happen at the resurrection.
Yeah, infinitely more powerful than
Right.
any nuclear reaction
Right.
that we can set off here. And that's a great reminder that will happen at the resurrection, and that is what we will witness when he comes again in glory.
Yes.
So our true confession in faith in Jesus Christ is that he is truly the Son of God, and not just a prophet or a wise teacher or a friendly hippie from the first century. Jesus, the Son of God, is co-equal and co-eternal with the Father, perfectly united.
He's a modern Roman hippie.
Yeah, exactly. He was wearing sandals, long hair. I'm sure he had a few tie-dye shirts.
Hey, Frankie.
Yeah. So he's perfectly united in being with God the Father. The ancient creed uses the word homoousios, meaning of the same substance, and that comes directly from the Council of Nicaea. Jesus is not another God, nor was he created by God, nor is he inferior to God the Father in any way.
It reminds me of, probably goes back a couple of years now. Remember when we going through the surveys you were doing with evangelicals and Catholics, and
Yep.
an astonishing percentage of evangelicals believe that Jesus was created.
That's right. That was from Lifeway's State of Theology survey that they
Right.
do with Ligonier Ministries. Yeah, and it's shocking, especially on the evangelical side. There's
Yeah.
just so much misunderstanding about the nature of Jesus.
Right, and you and I were like, how do you read the prologue of John and come to the conclusion Jesus was created?
Right.
Right, but anyway, it's important to the creed.
Yeah.
To the creed. Yeah.
And it also reminds me, you shared an older article from the Catholic Thing that was written by St. Jerome, and he is railing against Arian heretics and really fighting the same old battles. And it's remarkably, even down to how he gets angry at these people that he's
Jerome could
fighting
do
with.
that,
It sounds very much like some of the contemporary battles that we have to face.
Yeah, and how important words are.
Yeah,
right.
The importance
You know,
of words. Why do they hide behind vague language?
How progressive use like innocuous words to avoid having to deal with truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It goes back to why words matter and why we recite the creeds every single week in Orthodox liturgical traditions, because the specificity of what we believe is foundational to remaining within the bounds of orthodoxy.
Plus, we chuckle a bit now, right? You had your experience in Maine where they had some self-written creed, and you were like laughing through it all. And then, of course, we had the experience of the Sparkle Creed.
Oh yeah,
that
I'm sure many of our listeners
will
recall
know what
the Sparkle Creed.
Creed is, and I don't know how you can even say that with a straight face, right?
Yeah, it's a parody of itself.
It is.
Well, what I find, and again, with all love and reverence to our evangelical and especially Baptist brothers and sisters, whenever you get to that phrase, the Holy Catholic Church in the ancient creed, there's always the asterisk. You got to make absolutely clear it's universal. It says we've got nothing to do with Roman Catholics. No cause for alarm.
Yeah, there was no United Church in.
Yeah.
Like when it was, as if there was no United Church when it was written. Good point.
But we digress. So picking up with the article here, the affirmation, God from God, light from light, reminds us that Jesus' transformation before Peter, James, and John was a glimpse of his own eternal glory, which is the glory of God the Father. Jesus shines from within because he is light, and he is light because he is one with the Father and of one being with the Father.
Right. This should hearken a regenerate, literate Christian back to Genesis, right? Light exists before the sun's created.
Yes.
Because God is pure light. Jesus is pure light, right? And that's what's lighting the world, in the authors of the first creation stories, poetry, not the sun. It's the pure energy light of God. And that really reminds me of that paragraph that you wrote there. It's very well done.
Thanks. So when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the stone tablets after seeing the Lord's back from behind the cleft of the rock, just his backside, the skin of his face shone. Moses shone as a reflection of God's glory. But Jesus did not reflect the Father's glory, but shone it directly, because their glory is one and the same. Moses was not permitted to see the face of God, lest he die. Peter, James, and John, however, personally witnessed the face of God through his Son, Jesus Christ, though they did not realize it at the time. Likewise, when we seek to deepen our relationship with Jesus and are conformed to his image, the eyes of our hearts are opened to see the face of the Lord through his Son. Not only was Jesus' face altered, but his clothes became dazzling white. This image prefigures our heavenly future through faith in him. The garments worn by God's elect in the high vault of heaven are as white as snow. These garments worn by all who enter the wedding feast of the Lamb are white precisely because they have been washed in the blood of the Lamb. Christ's transfiguration is our assurance of these glorious realities.
The perfect image of the invisible God, right? It is a paradoxical statement.
It is.
Isn't it, right? And yet, it's true.
It is, and especially, as as the church goes through the season of Advent and Christmas and Epiphany, this sits at the end of the Epiphany season really as the perfect bookend, because that was exactly why God visits the earth in Christ incarnate, because that's the only way that we could possibly comprehend who he is in his person.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he communicates to us through the language of written scripture as well.
Right.
We serve a God, while God in his totality is a mystery to us in many ways, it's not that he's unintelligible, right? We have a very logical and reasonable faith.
Yes. Which makes the enemies of Christianity very mad.
It does.
Because none of their human creations are logical and can even begin to compete intellectually with it.
Right.
Yeah. It's, not that the media is going to help us out on that.
No. No, they're not very good at clarifying things, are they?
No.
So we have the arrival of the Messianic age. What we learn from the Transfiguration goes beyond Jesus' change in appearance. After his physical transformation, Moses and Elijah appear next to Jesus and speak with him. And behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. The appearance of these two with Jesus clearly demonstrates that he is the perfect fulfillment of the law, represented by Moses, and the prophets, represented by Elijah, the hope for salvation of God's people. Luke writes that Moses and Elijah spoke with Jesus about his coming departure at Jerusalem, translated as his exodus in Greek. As Pope Benedict XVI explains in his book, Jesus of Nazareth, a book that I love and as all of our listeners are aware of, quoted many times.
Yes.
The topic of conversion is the cross, topic of conversation, rather, is the cross, but understood in an inclusive sense as Jesus' exodus, which had to take place in Jerusalem. Jesus' cross is an exodus, a departure from this life, a passage through the Red Sea of the Passion, and a transition into glory. A glory, however, that forever bears the mark of Jesus' wounds. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's always, whenever you're reading Joseph Ratzinger, it's like you read an apostolic father or one of the church fathers, right? And we've talked about it using other people smarter than us as comments. He writes in this paragraph. He can speak in this paragraph, and it's like, passage to the Red Sea of the Passion. Like, I'm not that smart.
No,
right,
yeah.
Right? And he's, what always strikes me, I can remember, teaching at different levels, graduate, undergraduate, parish, graduate level, about the Transfiguration. But even when I've been asked to teach for basic, more or less evangelical audiences, I'll start with this, but there's two incidences in Jesus' life that's like, there's just this big hole in their information, and because of it, it's like a Swiss cheese understanding of the economy of salvation. But the first is the Transfiguration, right, as you pointed out earlier. And so I was asked the question, right? It's like you're reading a story, and Jesus is on the mountain with the three amigos, right?
Yep.
And all of a sudden, these guys just appear. And so I asked the question to my class. I go, doesn't that seem strange to you? And they're like, no, this is the most important prophet. I go, they've been dead for thousands of years, more than that, right? And they're going, I go, where did they come from?
Right.
And I said, see, when you died, especially then, I said, your bones didn't last that long, right? I said, you're just dust. So I said, what does it tell you about the story? What's really being said by the author about Jesus?
Yeah.
Because it never comes into play in their formation theologically.
Yeah.
Because they hardly ever talk about the Transfiguration. And in the Latin West, well, we're way behind the East in the Transfiguration, right?
Yeah.
It's this major thing in the spirituality of the Orthodox Church. And of course, the answer is simple. It's because Jesus is God and he called them forth in recomposite form. And then, of course, I said, so the counter question is, where do they go when they leave? Well, they go back to Sheol where they came from. They go, oh no, they came from heaven. I go, no.
Heaven was closed.
Heaven's not open. Heaven can't be open until Jesus dies on the cross and the temple curtain is torn in two. So it's like, it's amazing, isn't it? How knowledgeable but uninformed, I want to say illiterate, but uninformed what the text is really telling you about Jesus himself as being God of God, light of light, true God of true God of true God. Because you're talking generation after generation of where this information is not passed on in theological formation.
Yeah.
And the other one's the ascension.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's another big gaping
just this
hole.
Huge gap because it doesn't fall. This isn't true about all the evangelicals. There's some great scholars, obviously, about it. But because they're not liturgical, and you're in the middle of your sermon through Romans, you did Easter, but 40 days after Easter, you're not going to talk about the ascension.
Yeah, you're never going to get there.
Right? So when do you get it? Well, maybe when you're doing your 42-week series through one of the Gospels or something like that. So a Christian sitting in the pew may or may never even hear a sermon about the ascension in their whole life.
Yeah.
As opposed to it reoccurring every year in the cycle of the church's life, and you hear about it. And then as you mature, you can piece the story together, the economy of salvation, by just the repetition of hearing these things is true. So I'm not trying to be pejorative, but it's that's been my experience in teaching, that I have to do a whole bunch of back work on both of those things.
Yeah.
Like with the Transfiguration, where'd they come from? But the ascension is, where did he go?
Yeah.
Right?
That's a great point.
And they're like, I said, well, if you're a human being and you travel through the Earth's atmosphere, you're going to just burn to a crisp. But not Jesus, because he's perfectly human and perfectly divine. And yet, the perfectly human Jesus is at the right hand of the Father right now.
Yeah.
With bones and flesh and human composite and memory and human intelligence.
Yeah.
Right? Faith. But that's what the scriptures teach us. Right? I've read too many books on that on the other side of the river, So just...
Yeah, it's just not pejorative, not meant to put people down. It's just a reality. The liturgy and the lectionary are teaching tools, and that's why we're such strong proponents of it and believers in it, because it's historical and there's a reason why it's endured.
You can't cheat as a preacher.
Yeah.
Right? You and I talked about it many times. Remember in your formation, it's like this uncomfortable things, I've used the example many times, the famous line from the psalmist, when they beat the Babylonian children's heads against the rocks, right? Like, you can't avoid it. You got to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
But if you just pick what you want to preach on every week, you're basically going to preach on things that you like or know, or, it's just human nature to be like that. Lecturing makes you have to deal with stuff you don't want to deal with at all.
Yeah, and because you've got the readings there printed out, and assuming you've got an informed congregation who's familiar with the cycle, it becomes abundantly clear when you're avoiding such passages because they're right there in front of you. Right. So there's accountability to it as well.
And the Reform, I'm not a big fan of the Reform lectionary because it just splices...
The Reform or the Revised
lectionary?
I'm
sorry, the Revised Common Lectionary, because it just splices up all the moral teaching that progressive didn't like about St. Paul. So you get ... right? And,
you get those ellipses in the middle.
Yeah, it's
which again,
that's why we kept the 79 lectionary and didn't go with the revised lectionary.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think in fairness to strongman, the argument around doing these preaching series through books of the Bible, you've got obviously faithful pastors who do hold themselves accountable. But like you said, it's human nature where there's always going to be the tendency when you're going to have to fight that when you're picking and choosing which books that you go through.
Right. Well, you and I know we've had people that have come to work in quote Anglican churches that we once did, and they got rid of the lectionary and just went back. And you and I know what they did is just went back on their sermon files and just preach things they've been preaching for 25 years.
Yeah, so it's just as easy to be unfaithful in
Right.
an electionary cycle.
Right.
We've witnessed that firsthand. Where was I here?
I didn't mean to go so far away. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I think it was all worthwhile conversation. So we were talking about the arrival of the Messianic age. We quoted Ratzinger. So Ratzinger references the conversation between Jesus and the dynamic duo here of Moses and Elijah. So we see that they're speaking with each other. We don't know exactly what they're saying, but we know that they are talking about Jesus' departure, his exodus through the cross. And so Ratzinger goes on to explain that the conversation reinforces the fact that the law and the prophets both point to the hope of Israel, the fulfillment in the person of Jesus, which leads in Exodus to his eternal freedom, to our eternal freedom and renewal, which is a hope secured by Jesus' suffering as servant of God and Son of Man. So we commemorate this new Exodus in the liturgy of the Great Vigil of Easter, remembering God's faithful deliverance of the Israelites through the Red Sea and renewing our hope in the one who will deliver us into glory.
Yeah, the Exultant is unbelievable on Easter, isn't it? It's just so beautiful. Oh, yeah.
Which again goes back to the ancient liturgy, and it ties all of these elements of preaching and teaching throughout the church year together.
All the way to the 4th century.
Yeah.
Yep.
So at this point in time, the three disciples awaken and are overcome with fear at what they see. Then Peter, still in a daze from his slumber, suggests to Jesus something that may appear nonsensical at first. And of course, we're always quick to give Peter a bunch of crap for this.
Peter the dope.
Dump on Peter here.
Yeah.
Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. So some of this I also borrow from Ratzinger here, and he goes into great detail at the scholarly level, analyzing what Peter is talking about, and it cuts really, really deep, and you can look at it from a few different angles. So I tried to distill that down. Really, you have some scholars.
It's hard to do, though.
It's really hard. It's dense.
Is.
It's really difficult talking, because you have to get down to an understanding of these Jewish festivals and feast days, and then there's an internal debate among scholars here within the text as to dating precisely when this transfiguration event takes place.
It's in different places for some of the evangelists.
Exactly.
Right.
And so depending on which text you read, you can interpret the transfiguration differently depending on the proximity of the Jewish festival that it
And
that
for
it
Matthew,
dates.
it has much different meaning.
Right. And so what we go into here is that some of them date the timing of his transfiguration to the last day of the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles, which is the one that at least I gravitate toward, because at least it's easiest for me to explain too.
I agree, though. It makes the most sense, because that's what he's doing.
He's talking about tents, which are tabernacles.
Let's tabernacle on this mountain, because this is where God is. It's like, that's what a good Jew would do.
Yeah, and
In fact, especially one who's in the presence of God.
Yeah, in the presence of God, he's a faithful Jew, and he would obviously be aware that, hey, this is pretty crazy, and it's the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles.
And the fact that Elijah's there, he knows that the culmination of time has arrived.
Yes.
So
Peter's no dope here.
No, he's
Just
actually
struggling for words.
Yeah, as usual. A lot of bad things have been said about that over the years that makes Peter sound like he belongs in remedial classes.
So, explained in the text here, some scholars date this to the timing of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is a remembrance of God's past provision for the Israelites as they wandered the desert, dwelling in tents, and in anticipation of the tents in which the righteous would dwell in the age to come. So it's possible then that Peter, he saw the transfiguration at the beginning of this messianic age. He knew where they were in relation to the Feast of Tabernacles, and he saw as this is it. This is what this feast is predicting. So let's go, and he prompts them to want to build such tents as were predicted by the Feast of Tabernacles. So the Word did indeed become flesh and pitched his tent among us, that we read in John's Gospel,
Right.
in the person of Jesus Christ.
That's awesome.
Isn't that cool?
No, yeah, it's like unlike me, you know. I feel like me, you know, you put a puzzle together with my grandmother and the two pieces wouldn't fit, and I'm banging that thing in there. I'm like, that's gonna fit, right? But it doesn't. This fits perfect.
Yeah.
It's perfect. It's
Divine revelation.
yep.
But the Feast of Tabernacles was not yet fulfilled, of course, on the Mount of Transfiguration. The Messianic age had begun, but Jesus still needed to redeem the tabernacle of humanity. And Benedict goes on, he writes poignantly as always, "It is only as they go down from the mountain that Peter has to learn once again that the Messianic age is first and foremost an age of the cross, and that the Transfiguration, the experience of becoming light from and with the Lord, requires us to be burned by the light of the Passion and so transformed."
That is so incredible, right? And this is so counterintuitive to much of Christianity since, for instance, the early 20th century Pentecostal movement and all this stuff, that the point of Christian worship is kind of getting high.
Yes.
Right? And the point...
It's emotive.
Right. It's emotive, right. And it's like, oh, I didn't feel the Holy Spirit here today, right? You have the right music. You certainly can't worship Jesus without drums, right? And here, Ratzinger, and it reminds us, our job is to come down from the mountain, take up our cross daily, follow Jesus, and bring the Gospels to the corners of the earth. Not to go to some hiding place where you can be like Gnostics in the presence of God, right? It's just the opposite, and that's what this Jesus of Nazareth is going to go down as one of the greatest books ever written in Christian history.
Absolutely.
In my opinion. I mean, he's going. Why he has to be named a doctor of the church at some point. I mean, he's just so. And he did this like when he did it. You know, he was Pope, but he wrote it as Joseph Ratzinger.
Right.
You know, just because it's amazing. It's just one of the most amazing pieces of work. And like an average person can read it. It's not like reading something Rowan Williams wrote, where I'd be going, "What? Huh?"
Yeah. It's accessible. It's dense. It's not an easy read.
No.
But it's accessible. And the translation was done very well into English because it was written in German.
German, right?
But it is. It's not like reading a textbook. It's beautiful prose, and it's also
He's not trying to like tell you how smart he is. He's actually trying to get you to say, Jesus is your Lord, right? That's his whole point.
Well, it's not even, I would highly encourage all of our listeners and viewers to check it out and read it. It's really not, right, it's not preachy. It's not even like a lecture. It's really described actually on the back of the book as my personal journey to understand and see the face of Christ, to know the face of Christ. So it's it's almost self-reflective in a way, where it comes across as it's really an overflow of what he's learned and the beauty and praise that he himself has experienced in his research.
Yeah, when I first bought this for our priests and on staff, I gave each a copy at Christmas way back when it first came out. Would it come out 11, 12, somewhere in there, earlier. And when I read it, it struck me that here's a guy, as I've said, I think he's the best theologian in 500, maybe 1,000 years, in my opinion. And what he's saying, it all boils down to him is the joy he has that Jesus is Lord. That's really that's what he wants to share.
Yeah, that's all there is to it.
Right. And so he I think he does a very good balance. He's not saying his critical method is irrelevant and all this stuff, but he's saying all that can blind you to the joy that you're supposed to find in Jesus as Lord.
Right.
Right? And he's just a unique communicator.
Utterly. So we come down from the mountain, and actually, one other thing, because you mentioned what it represents in the Christian experience, but preparing this article, I was also reminded of what it represents, where it is in the liturgical calendar, where we finish Epiphany, and we've got this season of feasts where we've looked at, you go back through to the Epiphany, and then you've got the Christmas season, and of course Advent is building up in anticipation of that. So it is like literally this mountaintop experience from the first part of the year, and you do literally, now we descend into this time of fasting and humility in the season of Lent, which then brings us to the cross at Easter.
Right, and I think for earlier generations of Christians, it was easier, right? Because they weren't inundated with Santa Claus and reindeers and the endless bombardment from 4th of July on about Christmas, right? Because it's a massive transition, obviously, right? And the church in their wisdom, putting the baptism of Jesus, right? So you go from the Epiphany, and now Jesus is 30 years old getting baptized. Because that's not the point. The point is that that's how we all begin life, right? We recognize that Jesus is the universal Savior of Jews and Gentiles, and that we enter into that life through baptism. So that's why that feast is there, right? As opposed to, how come he's 30 now? And, and all the other questions you and I have to answer. And but you get to this transfiguration at the end of the Epiphany season. So this glorious stuff that started in Advent, like this gigantic crescendo, and then all of a sudden, Mother Church is saying, now you, Nathan, have to come down from the mountain and pick up your cross and go share the gospel.
Time to come back down. Time to get to work. So now we move on to the proclamation of his divine authority. So the Transfiguration event culminated in a final display of Jesus' power and authority, concluding with a simple command. As he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my Son, my chosen one. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. The cloud that overcame Jesus and the apostles is once again reminiscent of the Israelites' desert wandering. This cloud is the same theophany, which is a visible manifestation of God's presence, the same theophany as the Shekinah cloud, which led God's people through the desert by day and hovered over the tent of meeting. As Benedict once again points out, the cloud hovering over the tent of meeting indicated that God was present. Jesus is the holy tent above whom the cloud of God's presence now stands and spreads out to overshadow others as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful, right? It's one of those hard things, one of my wife's relatives, generations of evangelicals, and why she's completely baffled by the use of incense in high church worship. And I'm saying, well, I said it's completely biblical, right? It goes back, right? It's the presence of God, right? And so you incense the altar because that's the ultimate presence of God that we can experience on this side, the veil of tears, right? Jesus and the Holy Sacrament. And we're asking for our prayers to rise with it to heaven, right? And it's really not that complicated of a concept, right? And it's
well, we watched that video recently Jonathan Pageau did analyzing the interior restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral in France, and that's exactly what he said. He goes, because he's focused in on that really strange, incongruous altar that they put right in the center, where everything else is exactly how it was historically.
They did such a good job at everything else.
Everything else, but this bathtub-looking half-circle altar in the middle of the cathedral there, and it is physically and visually jarring. And he goes on to explain, like, you look at the historic shape of ancient altars, which were square, and he says exactly what you said. It's not that complicated.
They were tombs.
They were tombs, and the square indicates stability, predictability. It is the structure of the earth from which we raise up our offerings to the Lord. And
you can really wonder, what were the ecclesiastical politics of that?
That must have been intriguing. And that was, he obviously doesn't know for sure, but he surmised that, perhaps there was some politicking on the inside that said, all right, well, fine, you want the church restored to the old ways, well, we're going to do the altar, and you're going to have to live with that. Because
which is the most important thing in the whole
we're going to take, Satan's like, we're going to take that most important thing and we're going to distort it, because you have to imagine there were plenty of people who wanted the whole church to be redone like that.
Yeah, I was honestly, because I hadn't kept track of what was going on, so when I read and saw the stuff you sent, I was like thrilled that 90% of what the interior of that cathedral looks like. But when I saw that thing, I'm like, is that a salad bowl?
Yeah.
What is that gigantic thing?
Yeah.
Sitting there, right? It has no touchstone with anything in the course of Christian history.
Right.
So it's like, that's not, Christians have never celebrated the most holy sacrament or anything remotely that looks like that. So why put it in one of the most famous cathedrals on earth? But we know the answer to that, I think.
So we have the Shekinah cloud, and together here with the gospel reading for the first Sunday after the Epiphany, which commemorates the baptism of Jesus. We were just discussing that. Luke's account of the Transfiguration bookends this season of the church year with repeat proclamations from the Lord. This is my Son, my chosen one. Here, God adds an essential command. Listen to him. So after the baptism, this is my Son, my chosen one. And here at the Transfiguration, this is my Son, listen to him.
Well, it's so awesome that in Peter's epistle this is quoted, basically. That it wasn't just in the Q source, quell source, right? That Matthew, Mark, and like the author of the epistle, Peter's epistle had this information too.
Right.
So it gives you this. It's very difficult for progressives to just push this to myth.
Right, because you've got it in now multiple ancient sources in the scriptural text.
Right, which aren't related to each other.
Right.
And wouldn't have necessarily even known about each other when they were. Well, that epistle was written very late, so they would have known about at least one of the two or three of the Gospels. But still, it's pretty awesome. I love that epistle when you read it on the Feast of Transfiguration. But I always love the cloud. It's like I'd ask people, I go, so what's going on here? This isn't like you're going through fog, right? It's not like you got some big fire burning in your pit in the backyard, right? This is presence of God, right? Again, it's just so visual. This the Transfiguration. You can close your eyes and see it.
Yeah, it's a visceral experience.
It is very much so. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things in the scriptures. Yeah.
So when Moses encountered the Lord atop Mount Sinai, he descended with the Torah, God's word of law, which the Israelites were called to obey. So we're going to get into another that in the Transfiguration. There's so many different elements of it that fulfill parts of prophecy, or at least they allude to the coming fulfillment of prophecy in the person of Jesus Christ. So atop the mountain now, the three apostles encounter the Lord in the person of his Son, who is a living Torah. So Moses receives the physical Torah, the physical tablets, and now the apostles encounter the living Torah, the person of Jesus Christ, and they also descend with their own set of, their own new command, the fulfillment, listen to him. So they descend the mountain with him, who they are called to obey, and God calls us to do the same.
Right.
The Transfiguration of Christ is a proclamation of his divine authority. When Jesus shone like the sun, the apostles witnessed the coming glory of God's kingdom and power. When the Lord thus proclaims, "This is my Son, my chosen one, listen to him," he makes an absolute truth claim about Christ's heavenly authority.
Yeah, all this, it just amazes me, right? Especially with Matthew's gospel, right? Jesus is the lawgiver in Matthew. That's what he presented. He's the fulfillment of all Jewish prophecy. It's it's 5 books being presented, which it's not a coincidence. There's 5 books of
Right.
the Torah, right? The Sermon on the Mount is built around it. It's just the author of Matthew's Gospel is brilliantly using all of this information to present, really elongating the Transfiguration into an entire narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So at this point, I start to transition now. You could spend many pages analyzing the Transfiguration, but I want to take a look now at application, and this will get us into the rest of our discussion today too. So I titled this section, we've got no room for indifference. No room for indifference. This proclamation presents us with a binary choice. Just as we must choose whether to submit to earthly authorities, we must also choose whether we will submit to Christ's divine authority. Here, the Transfiguration demands a response: submit or disobey. There is no middle ground. One cannot witness Christ's true majesty and remain indifferent. In an age where moral absolutism is anathema, were you going to say something there?
No, I'm just writing a note.
So in an age where moral absolutism is anathema, is where we are allergic and viscerally opposed to moral absolutes, it is popular to play the fence about any assertion which calls into question matters of eternal significance, claims which deny a person's so-called right to do whatever he pleases without moral judgment, even demanding acceptance from others, so long as he is not thought to be harming others. Claims which also contradict our collective reassurance that all faiths are a path to God, and it does not matter so much what one believes in the end. By this worldview, it is far more fashionable, even intelligent, to claim indifference and uncertainty. Why make such a big deal about God? We can't really know for certain. Everyone is just trying their best, and of course, infamously,
Right.
who am I to judge? That's a famous quote there.
Yeah, it's a summary of the complete
Yeah.
abyss of nonsense that was going on in Western culture.
Yeah.
Right there, right? Why make such a big deal of God? Right? So the House of Commons passes. You want to kill yourself at 16? Yeah, we'll help you. We'll pay for it, right? Grandma's old.
She's not providing anything to
No.
society. She's not working anymore.
She's costing us a lot of tax money. We got global warming to think about,
yeah.
right?
We got incremental changes in temperature
Grandma,
that we have to worry
finish knitting your shawl there because you're checking out next week, right? It's like, let's make a big deal of God. It's literally true. I feel kind of guilty even joking about it, but that's literally God's mocked in every conversation.
It is.
There's no serious conversation about God at the socio-political level in international politics or commerce. We see a glimpse, a hope of change after November 5th. We'll see if that's going to be the
We'll see if that holds true.
Yeah.
And what was I going to say about that? It's really like it's the natural outcome of kicking God out of the public square and mocking him for generations that you're going to end up in situations like this.
Oh, it's like your articles that you've written recently and commented on C.S. Lewis. He's like, he nailed it.
Yeah, it's the nail on the head.
70 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, good luck with that when you take God out of the public square.
Right.
And, I always kind of had this wish that Lewis could be alive now and go, idiot.
Yeah.
You're
See,
all idiots.
I told you so.
Yeah. It's like, how's that going? But in essence, Lewis is alive and saying it because Lewis is as relevant as ever.
Yeah.
Across every denominational spectrum. He's such he might be Anglican's most unique contribution to the...
I would agree with that. And he's such a unique figure in that, he's maybe the only person who every denomination tries to claim him.
And he wasn't a cleric.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know this for sure. Like, I don't have the statistics handy to back it up, but I would argue he continues to be more popular by the year than he was,
absolutely.
even decades ago.
Yeah, his it's always opinion, but I think as far as effectiveness, taking the brilliance of Joseph Ratzinger out of it, but just like for a common defense as an apologist of the Christian faith, I don't think anybody in the 20th century was better than C.S. Lewis.
No, and you'd be hard pressed to pick someone out.
No, I mean, like you and I, we know our Catholic brethren. Like you read the Catholic thing, they quote C.S. Lewis probably 100 times a year.
Yeah.
Right? And it's almost like they're going, he's not a Roman Catholic, but we
Dang
get
it. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's just right.
Yeah.
Right? And he was obviously this brilliant, he's brilliant at rhetoric.
Yeah.
And he's just a uniquely gifted person. And he was humble. So, yeah, he's a great gift. Is there a new movie, a book coming out about Lewis?
Well, there was one a few years ago recently. It was called The Most Reluctant Convert.
Yeah,
and it was based on a biography about him. I'm not aware of any more recent ones.
It's Bonhoeffer.
There's a Bonhoeffer one.
It's Bonhoeffer I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's one I'd like to see. I haven't seen yet, but some close friends of ours have watched it and highly recommend it.
In my mind and in my theological formation, Bonhoeffer and Lewis kind of go hand in hand for me because they're of similar age and
they were kind of
they're
contemporaries.
both World War I guys, and then came through and of course Bonhoeffer had connections to the Church of England with Bishop Bell and all that. So and both obviously Bonhoeffer's another guy, pretty smart dude.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time talking about him.
Yeah, we could get sidetracked with him.
Get sidetracked never.
Who leaves safety to go back to Nazi Germany?
Right?
Right? A brave soldier of the cross does.
Yeah, that's someone coming down from the mountain to carry his cross.
Absolutely.
The other thing which we'll get into in the remaining paragraphs, but I wanted to discuss was liberty versus libertinism, which we kind of get into here a little bit, where people now claim that they have a right really to personal autonomy. We hear that a lot, where it's really you have the so-called right to do whatever it is you want to do, so long as you're not, I guess, physically harming another person or infringing on someone else's right to autonomy. This goes hand in hand with the paramount doctrine of consent, especially like in sexual relationships, which obviously is important, but when you throw out God and you throw out moral absolutism, now all you're left with is consent, but that isn't really true freedom, right? Liberty is not the freedom to do whatever it is you want. It is the freedom to discern and to choose the good. And
absolutely,
you don't have a right to do and to choose that which is bad, but that definition falls apart if you no longer have a common understanding of what good and bad are.
Right.
And so we get into this as the article wraps up because so I go on to say, of course, when it comes to following earthly authorities, fence sitting does not work as a get out of jail free card. So you can see here it gets selectively applied when we're talking about God and matters of eternal significance. Oh, well, truth doesn't really matter. There's no moral absolutes, but the police officer who pulls you over for speeding will not listen to your arguments about the speed limit being theoretical or relative, and the number on the sign applies whether you choose to believe in it or not. The same goes if you're standing in the middle of an intersection and a semi-truck is hurtling towards you. This is an R.C. Sproul illustration. The truth is absolute. Either the truck is going to hit you or it's not. If you refuse to believe in the semi-truck driving toward you, that's not going to help your odds.
No.
The here's another example. The IRS still expects you to pay taxes even if you claim to be a good person, just trying your best. They're not going to accept that as a written letter with your tax return. I'm just trying my best,
Dear
man.
IRS.
Dear IRS.
I'm a good person, but I'm not giving you any money.
Yeah, I'm not giving you any money.
Yeah.
I'm trying my hardest.
Yeah.
I need every penny.
Yeah.
Claiming ignorance or indifference to the tax code does not work as an exemption.
Hunter Biden could pay it for you.
Yeah, he could probably
he's
help
got an
you out.
extra $1.4 million. He could just
Sell some paintings. All right, last paragraph here, and then it looks like you're looking something up. So, when Peter, James, and John descended the mountain after Jesus, they began their initiation into the full reality of God's kingdom, which we enjoy today as God's new covenant people. The apostles followed a king who did not wield his power over them, but exercised that very power through his willing sacrifice on the cross. We must also descend the mountain and follow Jesus there. If we do, then Christ's manifest power in our lives will shine a light that cuts through the darkness in a world of anti-truth. For though we dwell in a land of deep darkness, see Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2, we have seen a great light, and that light will never be extinguished.
Yes, it's very well written at the end. You know, I've always, this craziness of autonomy and, you know, the questioning of everything, every institution, you know, the founding fathers, every, you know, gosh, the church fathers, everybody. But like even cranking on Jesus. Why did Jesus pick Peter, James, and John? Why didn't he bring all the guys up there?
Yeah, that's kind of exclusive. That's not fair.
Exactly. It's like, that's discriminatory. Why would he just pick those three? And then why would the other 9 have to believe what they said, what they saw? And I mean, that's like kind of crazy it gets, right? It's like, it's as if 3 people can't be more in tune, better equipped, and have better acumen to do a job than somebody else.
Right.
Right? Which goes back to this whole nonsense that equality means everybody's equal in their abilities and their ability to acquire merit. And that's just not true.
Right.
Right? Yeah, the thing I was just going to read to you about liberty, which applies to you, but it's, you know, we took it from the 1662 book. I could go all the way back to Cranmer, right? It is a most invaluable part of that blessed liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, right? Galatians 5:1, right? And that is so much what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
True freedom isn't found to be able to do what you want. True freedom is the ability to do what's morally right because you have the choice to do it because it's what's best for the common good.
Yes.
That's what true freedom is. Otherwise, you're a slave.
Right.
You're if you can just do what you want, eventually you're just going to be alone and dead.
Yeah.
Literally, if you bring it out to its logical conclusion, that will mean for you. Because why would anybody want to help you?
Yeah.
Right.
You'll naturally alienate everyone else around you.
Right. You possibly can't be part of a collective solution to any problem.
Especially if everyone else around you is following the same moral code that you are.
Right. And, you know, it's like, you know, the battle that's going to go on about leaving the 10 Commandments up down, is that Louisiana?
Yeah, it's in Louisiana.
Yeah. It's like, listen, folks. Without the 10 Commandments, there would be no Western civilization.
Yeah.
There'd be nothing. There wouldn't be literature. There wouldn't be jurisprudence. There wouldn't be freedom. There certainly wouldn't be any rights for women, right? So it's like, we don't want that stuff on the wall. That's like, you know, we want some John Lennon song, right? Yeah. Imagine if, right? Let's put John Lennon's Imagine up on the wall. That'll just make everybody imagine there's no heaven.
That's depressing. I don't get how that...
Was that the most disgusting thing? It still boggles my mind that at the funeral of the most evangelical man to ever be president of the United States, at his wife's funeral.
Oh, yeah.
They get up and
Jimmy
sing.
Carter.
They get up and sing.
No, excuse me, not Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter's
Carter's wife,
Yeah, his wife.
And they sing Imagine. I'm just like, and then they clap. And I'm like, it's antithetical to everything that evangelical faith is about, the Baptist Church is about. And it's like, I just cannot wrap my mind around, like the pastor, right? The pastor sitting there going, imagine there's no heaven. That's there's our whole message to the world. It's like, That's how
That'll
it's how
evangelize.
distorted everything is.
That's like putting a stupid bathtub altar in the middle of Notre Dame.
Yeah. Like literally, I think when all that went down, I was probably flipping out, and you were probably trying to give me like Valium or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, I would have walked out of that. I would not.
Yeah, I wouldn't have stuck around.
No
for that.
way. It's like
It's an insult.
Oh, it's totally insulting. And didn't what's his name saying that? They used to claim to be believers. I think.
I don't know. I don't remember who it
country
was.
western guy and his wife or whatever it was. And anyway, yeah, it's just prejudice. Peter, James, and John. They should have voted. Who went up on them?
Yeah. We're gonna vote. See who gets to go up with Jesus.
God can't decide
Yeah.
those things. We got to vote on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I vote for one of those obscure guys. We don't know who they really were on the apostles list there, right?
Yeah. Like Saint Matthias
Yeah.
or someone.
Yeah.
He gets no credit for Matthias.
Yeah. Come on, let's give somebody else a chance here. It's a good article.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. It was, as always, like writing these articles, I'm always grateful for the opportunity because I get to revisit topics like this and renew my appreciation for it. And I always learn a lot of new things in the process. But I think the next part of what we wanted to talk about here is we talk about spectacle, right? Spectacle being a striking visual display, usually a public visual display. And I think oftentimes it is used disconnected from substance. So you've got a striking visual display without much substance behind it. It's for the sake, like getting attention for attention's own sake. Yet at the same time, you mentioned as we were reading this, that the Transfiguration is a very visible, very visual and visceral event. Like you can feel it and you close your eyes and you can picture it. So there's a contrast there where the Transfiguration is no mere spectacle. It truly is what it evokes, what it shows. Jesus is not reflecting light. He is pure light and pure energy as God himself. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we've been discussing the historic liturgy. And so what I wanted to discuss here is we've got the beauty of the ancient liturgy pitted against empty spectacle, or I would even say anti-spectacle, like really, really void sort of beige versions of Christian worship today.
Yes.
And really to start with the conclusion, it's young people, my generation, millennials and Gen Z, are increasingly drawn to the beauty of traditional Orthodox ancient liturgies. And so there's an obvious reason behind that I think is worthwhile for us to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, the rise of what's become non-denominationalism, which is literally is what it is. There's no doctrine because it's non-denominational. So how can you have doctrine?
Right.
So I mean, I guess it's up to the pastor or however that local assembly is governed. Did they decide what's true or what? Of course they'll fall back to, well, we just believe in the Bible, whatever the heck that means, right? We all know that's really, it's I don't want to say it's a scam, but it just means you can believe whatever you want because you're the arbitrator of truth, right? So there's been this movement for a long time, really since the post-Second World War, and a move away from authority, of course. But at some point after X amount of generations, and this goes, I think Josh and I have had this conversation in that sharing things about our own personal lives, is that as you grow older, and if you grow up in a culture where you didn't get this stuff, right? You didn't grow up in a family where you had grandparents or parents or aunts and uncles, intergenerational people telling you that life's about what's true, life's about what's beautiful, life's about what's good, right? You just don't learn that in some void somewhere. Like you don't bump into a tree when you're 33.
Yeah.
You're like, I am all of a sudden into truth, beauty, and good, right?
Yeah.
You don't even know what it is, right? Because you have to experience truth,
Right.
beauty, and good. And what's so it's beyond discouraging. So, for instance, the Latin Catholic Mass has had a significant appeal to young people,
It has.
right? And yet, so here we have, where we're at in history with the current occupant of the See of Rome is doing everything in his power to crush the Latin Mass, even though it has this incredible draw, right? Well, there was 20,000 pilgrims that made it, 20,000 pilgrims in Europe that went, I think, to Chartres Cathedral last year.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it ended with a Latin Mass, and that's done, right? And it's like, if tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people, 35 and under, are being drawn to the divine, the truth, the beauty, and the good, through the ancient Mass, which was the Church's universal voice for 1,500 years, why would you suppress that? And it's not, never mind the argument, get into the arguments of the merits of the Novus Ordo or the Latin Mass. It's like, which one is drawing people to Jesus Christ? Will they have a personal relationship with him and they encounter the Trinity and Jesus and the triune God becomes Lord of their life? It's like, it seems to me you would want to draw as many people as you can to that.
Right.
Right?
It's counterproductive.
And yet, if the next pope is of a different theological ilk, it's like Doge trying to hack out $2 trillion out of the federal debt, right? That's what's going to happen. This has happened it's a smaller scale in the Anglican world, but young people are drawn to the 1662
They are.
prayer book of Cranmer's prose,
Yeah.
right? Because it tells them the truth about themselves,
Right.
right? There's no health in me, right? Because you grow up in this vacuous world from the time you're kindergarten, right? They own you, right? And they telling you all this stuff. There's nothing wrong with you. This is all right. This is all right. And then you live life. You get to be like you guys, 30th, and you're going, that's not true. Like because what you're searching for is truth, beauty, and goodness. Because that's what brings you joy. That's what's going to give substance to your relationships. That's what's going to find you a bride. That's what's going to make the gift of children the greatest joy you can possibly have.
Yeah.
As opposed to them saying, oh, no, just, hang out, do hookups, never have any, it's just an emptiness. It's like being in like the void of space.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of conversions to Eastern Orthodoxy, I think, isn't so much about culture. It's about the draw of the liturgy, right? It's timeless. Again, Chrysostom's liturgy, it puts you into heaven. The church is designed to make you feel like you're in the eternal dimensions already, right? And we don't give young people, I'm the last year of the millennials.
I mean, baby boomers.
Baby boomers. Geez, I did feel
You skipped a generation.
I felt younger for
You're
a
looking
minute
good
there.
today.
Yeah, all of a sudden my back felt better too. We just don't give enough credit that, we're not any smarter than baby. In fact, the baby boomers have far more knowledge. I mean, the millennials have far more knowledge than we do, right? We don't give them credit that they don't have the ability to think for themselves, and that they don't go through life and experience, and of course they can figure this out.
Yeah.
What we failed miserably was to tell them the right answer to the questions they're looking for.
It's true.
Utterly failed. The church, the culture, and you guys are part of this new generation with these voices. You're going to be a remnant voice, but you're going to be part of this movement that I sense in the next 4 years is going to be a lot more courageous people than there were the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Where we're going to see a shift in your age and even younger, and people who are going to come forth. And young people voted for Donald Trump.
That wasn't anything anyone expected.
Right. So what, without getting, we don't, our point's not to get into political ideology here, but it's a real statement.
Yeah.
That the majority of young people voted for Trump because they're saying, I feel lost in this culture. I don't feel valuable. I feel like cosmic debris, right? I'm a cosmic accident, right? Well, when you live in a culture of death that tells you that, children in the womb don't have value, if children don't have value, why does anybody have value? So if a child in the womb who's 2 days away from birth doesn't have value, why does Joshua have value? Why do you have value?
Right. You can't make an argument for that.
No, right? And so if you're a person who's going to try to buy into this idea that, like, this isn't life, but somehow you want to, it's like Joey Reid trying to sell all of her crap right?
Yeah.
That's what you get stuck with. And you listen to that enough, pretty soon, you're a despairing person.
Yeah.
Right? It's just this hopeless world that there's a reason why those three liturgies,
Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic,
and Anglican liturgy, everything has tried to ruin them, right? Crush them. More so in the Latin, in the TLM, in Cremus Prose, but they're not going to do it.
No, they won't succeed. I think because they are. We would consider those legitimate branches of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, which will prevail to the end of the age. So I would agree that they're going to survive in one manner or another.
It's like the scriptures, like the scriptures, right? I mean, communism tried to kill the scriptures. I can't remember the movie. It's from maybe 30 years ago, but it was more or less. I think it was supposed to be in Czechoslovakia, but basically the government put the scriptures on trial. And it was really well done, and the lawyer ends up winning his case that they can't put these people in jail for reading the scriptures because it's like makes it's complete lunacy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a similar thing that's going on, in a sense, with these liturgies and so forth. Like, the Word of God's going to last forever, and you're never going to eradicate the earth of Christians. In fact, the more you persecute them, eventually they'll multiply like rabbits. And the innocuous, horrific liturgies and what passes for worshiping God, and too much of non-denominational Christianity is nothing but worship of self.
Yeah, and it's spectacle, right?
Spectacle.
It's
right.
visual,
Your word. It's spectacle, right? It's like it's
a visual
about
display.
You going there to feel good about yourself. What does that have to do with Christianity?
Right. And it's self-help. Sermons are self-help talks, and you look at you got a number of points, and it's how to even for good ends, how to not be anxious, how to do this,
right.
Like 3 steps to do this or to do that,
right.
And it's
Here's
like
this self-help group,
yeah.
Right? As opposed to the simple gospel message. I met with a guy last night. He's in his 60s. I've met with him for 20 years. I've made much progress, but it's like, I go, the gospel's free, and it tells you by faith you are saved, and nothing can separate you from the love of God, not even death. And you can live in a peace that passes all understanding for all of your earthly days and live in joy. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet it's the hardest sell on the planet.
Yeah.
Right? And then instead, right, we look for love and faith in all the wrong places, as the country western song would say, And I like to it is, but existence in our culture, it is a spectacle. Everything's a spectacle. It's like, it's not about truth. It's like, it's all about flashy signs. It's like being in Times Square 24/7.
Yeah, it really is. Everything is
Yeah.
is digitized. It's
Yeah.
everything is about style over
Yeah.
substance, which is why the ancient liturgy is so countercultural in that way. Even with the medium that we're using for YouTube, there are many different things that we could do, maybe at the expense of our substance in order to increase view count. Tailoring and styling YouTube covers to attract a certain audience, having Josh cut up these episodes so we're doing a jump cut like every 5 seconds and really tapping into everyone's lizard brains. But I think, again, this style of long form conversation has also become so popular because it cuts against the grain of short form content, and people don't have long, in-depth conversations like this with one another, maybe perhaps like they used to.
I think your vision of starting this ministry, how long has this been? 3 years?
2 years.
Is, God graced you with vision as a pastor, but, and we would have conversations, people aren't going to listen, but eventually you're going to listen. And you're ahead of the curve, right? And like Rogan is a classic example, right? Rogan's like, he's an entertainer. He's not a great public speaker. He's not a great intellectual, but more people listen every day than anybody else in the world, right? And so the nature of podcasts, and as we know, Christian podcasting is displacing cable television, cable preachers, all these things.
Right.
Right? And so we need to be in the mix because there's going to be plenty of wolves in there too, right?
So you reminded me of something that I was going to text you guys about, and then I forgot, but in the post-mortem of the November election in the United States, it was described as really like the first podcast election.
Yes.
That the audience, the vast audience that listens to podcasts, especially within kind of the conservative leaning side of things, was a deciding factor. The power of podcast was the deciding factor, or a deciding factor, in the outcome of the presidential election.
Legitimate information
Right.
actually decided this.
Right. But
like here's the information. Make up your mind what you believe, as opposed to being an automaton who's going to listen to the same talking point from whatever.
But so what I guess the point is, this was the first election cycle where the influence of this podcast sphere surpassed that of legacy media sources. Yeah. And we in Christian ministry are on the cutting edge of that.
Absolutely.
Which is really cool, and I think something that we should all be very proud of, as well as our contemporaries.
I've never even listened to Joe Rogan until I listened to his interview with Elon Musk. Was the first time I ever listened to Rogan. I wish Rogan didn't have to drop F-bombs every other word. You can communicate much more effectively to a wide audience if you would do that. But Rogan as a social, a geopolitical entity, is riding the coattails of the work that Christian podcasts have been doing really hard for the last 5 years.
Yeah, I would say it's really a coincident rise.
Yeah, right. And it's like our Pints of Aquinas friend and all those guys who have been out there doing the hard work for the last 5 to 7 years. They built this layered foundation that podcasting just kept, but it happened to be mostly driven. It was mostly driven by Orthodox Christian faith. It wasn't driven by, some podcast in economics getting 50 million hits a day. It was cumulatively, when you put all of the Christian witness together, now you're talking about millions of hits a day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Millions, if not tens of millions.
Right. So,
and
the word of God never comes back void.
No, it doesn't. And our our peers online, I think, are pointing out the same thing. I noticed, like, Young Anglican points out a lot that there isn't an equal and opposite voice for outside of orthodoxy within the internet sphere. All of this energy around long form conversation and podcasting and digital ministry is overwhelmingly orthodox from a Christian perspective.
Well, that's the panic of progressive America. When Rush Limbaugh became the biggest force, the most influential person not elected to office in America for 20 years, right? The left never had an answer to Limbaugh because liberals won't listen to anybody because they all think they're right about everything, as opposed to people would be listening to Limbaugh because they're trying to learn something, or want to be influenced.
Right, they wanted to be informed or feel informed.
Right, in a direction that they have sympathy with. The same thing's happening now, is that progressive television, legacy media is done. It's not going to recover. They've lost half of their viewership just since the election, right? And so they're not going to be able to ever compete numerically with us in the podcast realm, because that's not how their brains work. They're not, because there's no one liberal. People like, what do you, I mean?
Well, it's an antiquated medium too. It's
exactly, but like if Joy Reid has a podcast, she's not going to get 9.5 million viewers like Rogan is. Right? Never. Not any of them, right?
Because it lacks intellectual honesty. It lacks
exactly.
substance.
It's not true, and they know it's not true. That's what the ultimate difference has become in these last several months, is that Morning Joe and his wife, right? They call this guy Hitler. He's a killer. He's going to line you up, shoot you, and put you shoot you and throw you in the pits and everything. They get their butts kicked. They go down and lick his feet within a couple of days.
You're talking about Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski.
Right.
They go back to Mar-a-Lago
which means they never believed what they were saying.
Yeah,
they never really believed that it was Hitler.
For the secular left, it goes back to the abandonment of moral, absolute truth. The words really only become tools to exercise power.
Right.
So you're wielding words in order to obtain the predetermined result that you desire.
Right. And, pick whoever you want, right? Say what you want about her. Candace Owens believes what she says.
Well, that's how you can tell the difference, is someone who genuinely believes they are speaking the truth and won't change their message even when it becomes unpopular.
And they're not afraid.
And they're not afraid.
Right? You're not, not to get into all this, but I met with two people yesterday. One in Christ, but he was talking about, how did you deal with COVID-19 and this and that? I go, well, I didn't. And he looks at me. He goes, "What do you mean?" I go, I never considered taking the COVID-19 shot. I said it wasn't a vaccine at all. It was a genetic modifier. And I said it wasn't going to. It never stopped the virus at all. And so he goes, "What'd you do?" I go, "I just refuse to take the virus. I take the vaccine." And he goes, "Did you wear a mask?" I said, "Never." He goes, "Anywhere?" I go, No, not anywhere. I got thrown out everywhere in the world. I said, it goes right back to you saying this article. Either something's true or it's not true.
Yeah.
And either you have integrity about what you believe, and whatever the consequences are of what you believe, you're willing to take the consequences and stand up for it. And you know me long enough, no way was I don't care if 100,000 people were yelling at me. I wasn't doing that. And what literally happened in this election, and it was happening in America, is that the boomerang has kind of caught up with millions of Americans that said, you know what, we got completely hoodwinked, and we just wasted trillions and trillions of dollars, ruined our children's education, right? They're never going to catch up. We've ruined the education system. Like, I'm not doing that again. And I think your generation, and as we go forward the next 10 years, they're not going to fall for that crap again.
No, I think people have really
Right.
grown wise
Right.
to
So I don't have
those
to worry
things.
about, being, you're killing us, as you know, during the height of COVID, I was asked to go back to a church I pastored, and I go back, I hadn't been there in 2 years, and I walk in the front doors, and there's tape, and the yellow tape for like when you have an accident, and tape on the ground, and
like caution
arrows.
tape.
Yeah, and I walk in, and people, you and I would know, and they're like, Bishop, the former deacon grabs my arm, you got to come over here and you got to wash your hands. I go, no, I don't. Like they should have known me better, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, we got to come over here. Like, what have you done the last 24 hours? I go, I'm not telling you that. And then there was another deacon, like, we need your address, your social security number for Governor Raimondo. I go, I'm not giving you any of these things, and I don't have to. And it was uncomfortable because I love these people, but I'm like, have you all lost your minds? Right? They said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, you invited me in here to preach at this person's funeral, so I'm going to walk that way, sit in the back pew. When it comes time to preach a sermon, I'm going to walk up there and preach a sermon. I'm going to walk back and sit back in the pew. It's exactly what I did, right? And every other pew was roped off. They all had masks on, including the people while they were saying the liturgy. And I'm sitting there going, this is what believers have become? We can't be like this in the world. We have to be something totally other than this, or we'll never have effect in the world, right? There wasn't many of us, but somebody's got to stand up for truth and have what's to do it, and there wasn't many.
Well, I think, to draw it back to the liturgy, I would say like the same impulse that...
You never shut the liturgy down.
But yeah, we never closed. Holy Communion never closed.
Never made anybody wear a mask.
Nope, we never forced anyone to
Our friend
do
Rob,
any of that.
Our friend Rob has given witness. He goes, the only church I know that never succumbed to any of it was Holy Communion Anglican Church.
Well, and it goes back to what we were just talking about, that the liturgy is true and it's supernatural, and that doesn't change just because earthly authorities have changed their mind about public health guidance. And so we were convicted in that. But what I was going to say is the same impulse that, I think drove the extreme ends of certain churches to conform to worldly expectations of the supposed dangers of a church service is the same impulse that it comes down to syncretism, of becoming like the world, and
Right.
It's the same impulse that I think drove many within mainline denominations to try and make church services seem more appealing for a mass audience. So dumbing it down, getting rid of all of these historic elements, and getting rid of the organs, playing acoustic guitars, and giving more social gospel, more self-help style sermons. All of that is, I think, wrapped up in the same underlying impulse to try and be more pleasing to the world outside of the church, and
Right.
in a misguided attempt
Right.
to grow the church. So
It's so contradictory to the whole Christian witness. Who were the people from apostolic age through the bubonic plagues, through all of the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, the medieval period, even up until the 19th century in Louisiana, right? Whatever it was. Christians by the hundreds and millions went out in the streets and just selflessly helped people to their own detriment, whether they were going to live or die, right? That's Christianity.
Yep.
That's not, don't go hide in your basement under a rock, right? We're not going to die, we're going to live, whether it's in this life or the next. And it's like we've just completely lost sight of what it is. And that's what the liturgy reinforces every week.
Yes.
In your heart, mind, and soul, right? And it's because when you go there, when it's done right, you encounter truth, beauty, and goodness that you can't find anywhere else in the world.
Right. And, on the other side of the coin, I think the same impulse that has driven so many people, and especially young people, to these forms of media and podcast and video and long form conversation about the Christian faith is what also drives us toward the historic liturgy, which is substance. There's a hunger for substance, and it's a reaction to the decades throughout our formative years of, you have older generations who inherited these beautiful buildings and institutions which very much pointed to the glory of God, and really tossed them aside as unimportant in exchange for much lesser forms or a lack of appreciation for the beauty and the truth of liturgy. And so now you have an impulse of returning to these ancient forms because they're substantive, they have meaning, they point to the mystery and the beauty of God and the Holy Trinity. And that's one of the many reasons why I love it so much, is because it gives words to those mysteries which I cannot express myself, and it's beautiful and it's true, and so it adds substance and meaning to your week.
All right. Well, and as a friend, a brother, a father, a grandfather, as a father of your little kids, what can you possibly give more valuable to your children?
Right.
I was in Rock's Market. I went from the chiropractor to the Rock's Market, and they were playing traditional Christian Christmas hymns, and I was and because of the day, I went in there twice. I went in there by myself, and I went back with my wife, and it was just a cycle. It was just, and I was like, wow, that's evidence of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was incredible. I was like, wow, there was no throw Grimmer off the train, no Rudolph, no John Lennon, and there's hope in that.
Yeah.
Right. There was beauty and goodness and truth. And I was thinking, Rock's Market, small market, but probably over the course of the day, 300 or 400, 500 people had cycled through there. And like everything else, it's subtly, it's being ingested in it if you hear it enough.
Right, it changes you.
It does.
It's exactly what the historic Christian faith professes: lex orandi, lex credendi. What we pray is what we believe. Just like anything else in life, the more time that you spend with a group of people or an institution, the more you are going to become like that with which you spend your time. So if you work in a large workplace that has a strong culture, you're going to be conformed to that culture. If you live in a separate culture of your own, but if you spend time and absorb the ancient liturgy and the ancient creeds, there is, of course, you need to engage with it honestly, but there is an osmosis that takes effect. And those, I find so often that the words of these ancient prayers that we pray on Sundays and in the daily office eventually become my own words that I'm able to use in my own prayers.
Absolutely. That is so powerful what you just said. You know my daughter Rebecca well, and she's an intellectual, right? But she's like, with her husband, they've been visiting different churches of the whole spectrum, and she's like, Dad, every time I go to these, not a Catholic or an Anglican church, or she would do okay in a Lutheran church probably, but she goes, those words, I'm waiting for some substance to happen in the context of the hour and a half I'm there, and I'm like, she goes, she just said to me, she goes, I feel like saying, when are we going to say it? God of God, light of light, true God of true God, only begotten of the Father, right?
Yeah.
And you realize, if you don't even have to think about it. It's like learning how to type, right? Like, the best thing I ever learned was how to type. I cannot tell you, if you ask me right now, what are the letters on the keys, I can't tell you. But once I put my fingers on a typewriter, on a computer, I can type whatever, 50 words a minute, right? Right? Because it's in you. That's how the creed is. Like, so a kid like you, my daughter, if I ask you, you could recite the whole creed. But that means, like, those words, they're deep in you.
Yeah.
They're
yeah,
deep, they're deep in you.
Once you get started, they
Right.
well back
Or it's like a
up out of you.
Eucharistic prayer. Like if I started
Cranmer's
prayer,
right.
Yeah, if you started it, you could go in the Orion's position and probably say just
Yeah, it's
about
like
the whole
a
thing.
sleeper cell activating in the back of your mind.
And it's a majesty what you're saying, right? And it's salvation, and you know, I really like what my daughter. She goes, it's just like, she says, there's no substance, and she says that's what's missing. She's 31 years old. She goes, I'm trying to encounter somewhere in the contemporary world of my age, where is substance? Where is it? And I said, you're not going to find it from the world. Go from out to in, right? You got to go from faith in and bring it out to the world. That's where you got to spread substance back into the world, but don't expect to find it out in the world and then drag it back into your life.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen. Yeah, so good stuff.
Yeah, excellent conversation. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I think we get a lot of mileage out of this. There's always more to be said about the creeds and the liturgy and common prayer tradition. So hopefully everyone who's listening here has had the chance to enjoy this conversation as much as we have. And this, along with many other excellent articles, are published in Lively Faith magazine, and a selection of them I think we can also begin to put on our website, livelyfaithministries.org. So thank you so much for everyone who's joined us to watch and listen today. Please be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment. That really helps us in the algorithm. And of course, again, visit our website, livelyfaithministries.org, or click the link to the form in our description, and we'll send you a subscription to this magazine free of charge. We just ask that you enjoy it and treasure it as much as we do, and feel free to share it with others as well. And I think with that, we'll wrap things up. So thanks again for listening.
Credo and Diem.
Credo and Diem. This, I
God.
believe, it's another article that we've got in a recent publication. So thanks again, Mark. Josh, thanks again as always. This has been another episode of the Lively Faith Podcast. God bless.